Yo, what's up guys? It's your boy HMSA 2012 here, back at it again, but this time with more of a discussion video in regards to future Pokemon games on a Nintendo Switch. Now before I begin, I will state that I understand that there are rumors circling around in regards to the Nintendo Switch for Pokemon, as this is around the time where we might be revealed an announcement from Nintendo through the Nintendo Direct, may possibly at E3 as well. So I'd like to begin with a discussion in regards to the supposed rumor that the way Pokemon on Nintendo Switch will be is it isn't going to be a turn-by-turn basis, but rather it would be a real action combat system. To give you guys an example, I believe Pokken is visually what I am seeing with the new Pokemon game on a Nintendo Switch. Although this seems a bit innovative, there are a few problems that I have about that kind of combat system, and I still favor the turn-by-turn system that Pokemon has been using since the inception of Pokemon games in general. For example, when we're talking about a real action combat system, how do we decide what Pokemon can be used for the system? And what I mean by that is that are Pokemon stats even going to matter when it's a combat system, when it's not mostly about who is the bulkiest, who is the most offensive, who is the most balanced? Are abilities gonna matter at this point in time with the real life combat system? Who knows? I believe, Pokemon stats is what makes all Pokemon unique. It's their unique identity, distinguished by millions and millions of players across the globe. And I believe that a real life combat system has to undermine a certain aspect of Pokemon stats and abilities in general. For example, if Landorus T has Intimidate, is that drop in attack going to affect the opposing Pokemon, let's say Mega Scizor's ability to combat against Landorus Therian form? So it's a very interesting discussion to bring up, as we are right around the corner for a possible Gen 8 or Switch Pokemon or Core RPG Switch game announcement. And another point that I like to make out is understanding that by not using a turn-by-turn basis, you're fundamentally ripping apart the Pokemon franchise. For over 20 years, our generations and generations of players have been used to the turn-by-turn basis. Obviously, with stats and abilities into consideration, the best strategies are made by thinking 1, 2, 3 turns ahead to decide the outcome of victory. But with the real-life combat system, it most likely seems as if it isn't going to be based on strategy somewhat. It's going to be more leaning towards who has the best reflexes, who can move the most, who can attack efficiently. And obviously that brings a lot of somewhat great innovative ideas to the table, but at the same time, without using a turn-by-turn basis, there are a lot of flaws that can possibly be brought up with such game. And another point that I like to bring into discussion is the idea that a Pokemon Switch game could fundamentally change VGC. Now, as you guys probably know by now, VGC, or the Video Game Championship format, is a 2v2 battle format in which the top players from each regionals end up participating in worlds for being crowned the best champion. And what I have a problem with the real action combat system is, how is 2v2s gonna work? Or is the best players in VGC not going to be Wolfie Glick? Would it not be Aaron Cybertron anymore? Would it be players who have the most reflexes, who is able to move their Pokemon the most? How is a 2v2 system even going to work without a turn-by-turn system basis. So that's something, to think about ahead with these kind of rumors. Me personally, I don't believe that a real action, I keep saying real life for some reason, but real action combat system doesn't really bring something, you know, it's innovative, but yet it could be problematic for the Pokemon franchise in general. And so I my personal belief is that the turn-by-turn system is still one of the most efficient because it makes Pokemon, more unique in what it does. You have over 800 Pokemon to choose from with stats, moves, abilities to take into consideration. Each Pokemon should retain its unique identity. And without a unique identity, that that real action combat system doesn't make that such Pokemon unique. And I know it's a bit kind of convoluted to think about it. I'll just give you an example. I'll go back to the Landorus Therian form versus Mega Scizor. With real action combat system, am I expecting a Landorus' Intimidate ability to affect the way a Mega Scizor will attack me? If Mega Scizor has Bullet Punch or even U-turn, how much damage will that do to my Landorus Therian form? Are stats actually going to matter? Are abilities going to matter? Are moves going to matter? How many times can I spam Bullet Punch? Because, there are limits to how many moves you can use based on a turn-by-turn basis. Will that same logic apply to a real action combat system? And another thing is that pivot moves, the two prominent ones, U-turn, Volt Switch, is that going to affect the real action combat system? Are we actually going to be able to switch bonds in between these type of combat action systems, where if my Scizor wants to U-turn out into a Pokemon, is that even allowed? Because usually for most combat systems, we do see some certain extent that you can switch out Pokemon. I guess in a way, Dragon Ball FighterZ has somewhat of a assist switch kind of mechanism, but will that really work for Pokemon? And again, when it comes to the moves, is the damage of the moves going to be based on stats? Is it going to be based on power-ups? How is it going to work in Pokemon? Now, it was completely understandable for me if this is just an in-game, property. Kind of similar to like where we first find out that Rotom gave you the ability to use 2 Z moves in one turn was only an in-game option and not a Wi-Fi or a competitive option. I understand that. But if this applied for the competitive scene, VGC, gym leagues created by multiple groups, and I will have a very detailed video in regards to certain metagames that could be improved or could be revamped, but that's for another time. But I'm wondering if a real action combat system is the answer to revamp Pokemon. And like I said, with VGC, the fundamentals of VGC just essentially get ripped into oblivion, where players such as Wolfreak won't be recognized by what have they contributed to VGC based on a turn-by-turn basis, but now new players is essentially going to be Pokken with 2 Pokemon fighting against each other. Will that work out? Who knows? And I don't think that having a combat system will make Pokemon better in general. So moving away from the combat system, I also want to discuss a few things that I expect to be on the Switch, for the new Pokemon game. Now, there are possible rumors that there could be a Gen 8, and I look forward to new Pokemon. And according to the history of Nintendo consoles, we always tend to have a new generation whenever there is a new console. For example, we had 3rd gen on the Game Boy Advance. We had 4th gen introduced on Nintendo DS. We had 6th gen introduced on the 3DS. So if history repeats itself, we could expect a new game a new game with a new generation and a new Nintendo console. Now, it might be a bit too early to think about Gen 8 because they could possibly remake a certain region, which I hope it's either going to be Sinnoh, Gen 4, or possibly 5th Gen, although it's most likely based on what I'm hearing from the rumors that we could possibly have a Kanto remake. Now I'm somewhat a bit neutral in regards to remakes of previous gens, especially for Kanto, where I'm not really going to be surprised if they ever remade Kanto again. But I feel like going back to Kanto is somewhat of a nostalgic reach in part of the community. Although there could be a good argument in regards to Kanto that Lily, if you guys followed up with the Ultra Sun and Moon or even 7th Gen story in general, Lily went to Kanto to become a better trainer. Following it up on the Nintendo Switch makes perfect sense. However, I think that it's time to move on from Kanto and let's explore a new region. Let's go to a region that hasn't gone much of the spotlight recently. Portia. Uh, Anyways, back to what I'm going to talk about for the new Pokemon game. I also have a bit of an issue in regards to move tutors. I hope, and I really, really hope that I can bring Pokemon or transport Pokemon from my Nintendo DS systems with the respective games, and Nintendo 3DS system with respective games onto the Pokemon Switch. I am not down to go capture all 800 or possibly, if Gen 8 arrives, 900 plus Pokemon in a single game. I want to transport my battle-ready Pokemon, my competitive Pokemon, my event Pokemon that has taken months, years to compile, and relocate them into the Switch game. I think they'll be amazing. I think what Game Freak should do is to create a Pokebank compatible between Nintendo 3DS and the Switch. Now, the same logic will follow if you transport Pokemon from your Nintendo 3DS to Pokemon Switch. You cannot do vice versa. I think that is fine, and I think there shouldn't be any problems with that. So, when I talk about move tutors, it kind of does take in part Pokebank, because there are certain Pokemon that can only learn certain moves from previous gens. For example, I think the most recent one that comes up to the top of my head is Clefable learning Soft Boil. Now, Clefable can only learn Soft Boil back in as a 3rd gen move tutor from Fire Red and Leaf Green. I really wish that the new Pokemon game has some sort of move tutor system where you can teach Pokemon all the compatible moves from all previous gens. Kangaskhan with Seismic Toss, Quillfish with Sword Stance that can learn Aqua Jet at the same time, Scizor with Scizor from from 6th gen or bred from this generation that can learn Defog on the new game. And I also wish that if for some reason, maybe this is a far-fetched hypothetical idea, that as you level up in game, that you can teach these Pokemon these kinds of moves, or we can stick to the obvious common battle point system that we usually have for the move tutors and items as well. So another idea that I would like to be implemented into these games is making sure that Pokemon themselves are able to be competitively viable. Because as a person such as myself who really is in the competitive scene of Pokemon, I really want to understand that hopefully that there is no more power creep, or if there is a power creep, it shouldn't be as drastic as there was in 7th gen. As you guys probably know by now, in in 7th gen, we were introduced to the Tapus, and just from those 4 Pokemon, with their typings and their abilities and their movesets, drastically changed the way we played Pokemon. And obviously the introduction of, more Pokemon from the 7th gen changed the way we played competitively. I wish that a power creep does not drastically, make more Pokemon less viable. I think the Pokemon themselves should be more of a balanced state, especially if you're thinking about doing a real action combat system. A Mega Rayquaza or a Primal Groudon or even a Primal Kyogre should not beat down a Pokemon that should be able to counter them. It doesn't make any sense. And again, it goes back to the question as, is the real action combat system the right answer? And how it will affect competitively. The VGC formats and, casual competitive battles themselves. Last but not least, I actually wanted to bring up something that doesn't directly correlate with the possible Nintendo Switch game of Pokemon, but rather communities outside of the Switch. For example, Pokemon Showdown, which is arguably one of the best Pokemon simulator games out there, how is it going to adapt a real action combat system? Is it going to keep the traditional format where, okay, if new Pokemon are introduced, we'll, use their stats and moves, and we just play turn-by-turn basis? Will Pokemon Showdown cease to exist or cease to function if real action combat system is what the Pokemon franchise is really going to implement? And there are also possibly other communities as well that, rely on Pokemon Showdown besides Smogon. And you have to think about, well, if it isn't turn-by-turn basis, how are those simulators going to adapt that real action combat system? Can they even do it? How will it be implemented? What factors should be implemented in order to make the game, identical to what is being reflected on the new Pokemon Switch game? So those are a few things that I really wanted to talk about in regards to, about the new rumored Pokemon game on Nintendo Switch. Now, me personally, I don't own a Nintendo Switch. I own a PS4. I own a Nintendo 3DS. And I don't think that this game being on the Nintendo Switch is going to make things more difficult. I mean, the max that a 3DS has ever been priced at was around $200. And with Nintendo Switch being around $250 to $300, it isn't really much of a jump, because there are other great games on the Switch as well. You have games like Mario Odyssey, which is like a Game of the Year nominee, and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is another Game of the Year nominee. I think that, the direction where the Game Freak is taking Pokemon to, I hope it's for the best. So to summarize my ideas and my arguments, is that the turn-by-turn basis is the unique identity for Pokemon. It should never be fundamentally ripped apart for a real action combat system, because I think that a real action combat system will present some sort of fundamental challenges, such as our moves, abilities, and stats even going to matter. And if so, if such system were to be implemented, how will that affect, Pokemon Showdown? And more importantly, how is it going to affect VGC format, where it's a turn-by-turn 2v2, doubles format? Can a real action combat system even use 2 Pokemon at the same time? And how will that work when one player is traditionally in command of their 2 Pokemon? So thank you guys for watching. Hit that like button and subscribe if you guys want some more videos. I'll try to upload more discussion videos like this. It was pretty fun thinking about these kinds of things moving forward. I always am part of my life is I always like to think 2 or 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And such discussions like this, you know, it's really cool making these kinds of videos because it makes me think outside the box. It makes me think of, you know, what possible solutions or even conflicts can be presented to such topics. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Goodbye.